You are not the father.
Fire Emblem 4: Genealogy of the Holy War has one of my favorite pairing mechanics in the series. The story takes place over 2 generations, and the choice of parents have a huge impact on how the children turn out, especially since you can play around with the Holy Blood mechanic, which impacts both weapon ranks and growth rates. For this reason, there's been a lot of discussion over the years on the best pairings, and people today have generally figured out the most optimal ones. But one thing I have never seen on the internet before is a video on how to make the absolute worst children possible. You see, if you happen to ignore the pairing mechanic of FE4, the game will punish you by giving you these horrible substitute units. They have lower growth rates, no holy blood, and many of them lack fundamental skills. For many, playing through the second generation of FE4 with these substitute units is seen as the hardest challenge possible. In fact, this was actually one of the first Let's Plays I did on this channel over 10 years ago. But in this video, I want to pose another challenge. If you go out of your way to sabotage your pairings as much as possible in the first generation, is it possible to give birth to Holy Blood children who are weaker than their substitute counterparts? That's what I'm going to be trying today. I am going out of my way to mess up my pairings so much that it creates the absolute weakest children possible. In case you're not used to the pairing mechanics of FE4, here's a quick crash course. Every female character in the first generation gives birth to 2 children, meaning the fathers are the ones who are the variables here. Unlike inheritance in the modern Fire Emblem games, where children tend to inherit 1 skill from each parent, in FE4 they inherit all of them. That means if you take this and combine it with this, you get this. You may be thinking, wow, that's really broken, and yes it is. That's why the second generation children are so strong. In addition to skills, the children also inherit half the growth rates of the opposite gender parent, meaning the choice of father has a big impact on how these units will grow. The kids can also inherit items from their parents as long as they can wield them at base. And of course, they also inherit their Holy Blood, which boosts their growth rates even further. The one thing you cannot change, however, is their class. They are set in stone no matter who their parents are. But this also means you have a lot of ways to sabotage them, which is exactly what I want. My general guideline for making the most awful kids possible is to ensure that the physical units get little strength and that the magical units get little magic, which is pretty easy to do. However, I also want to deprive any fighting unit out of the pursuit skill whenever possible. This is by far one of the most important skills in FE4 as you literally need it to double attack, and not every child unit gets this at base. Holy Blood is another interesting one. Some fathers have it, others don't, but not all Holy Blood is created equal. Odo Blood, for example, boosts HP and skill, but if I pass this down to a priest and a bow knight, then that's not going to do much for either of them, especially seeing as you actually need a skill to crit in this game. For this reason, passing down Holy Blood to kids isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as I can ensure it helps them as little as humanly possible. My next guideline is to ensure the kids don't inherit any useful items. This is very easy to do, as all I have to do is simply sell the parents' weapons to the pawn store, ensuring the kids don't get a good start in life. I also want to ensure that the children's base stats are as low as humanly possible. In FE4, kids will get some bonus to their stats depending on their parents' level, so I need to ensure that I don't give any mothers or fathers a single drop of experience in the first generation. This is actually very easy to do, since Sigurd is so absurdly broken he can solo it by himself. Of course, this will result in a very broken Seliph, but he can't really turn out bad no matter what you do. In fact, in this video, I'm not going to be bothering with any of the so-called canonical pairings because they can't really be influenced much. I'm only going to be focusing on the children who have actual substitutes. Now, while I could have made this entire video just in a theoretical format by pulling up stats online, I thought it would be more interesting if I actually showed you the children in-game. So for this video, I actually did 2 playthroughs of FE4. One where I paired up the horrible Holy Blood kids, and one where I killed off all the moms to create a substitute run. Because of this, I'm not able to do things like reuse multiple fathers for the kids. I have to plan out the run like I would a regular one, except that the goal is to make bad units instead of good ones. I'm going to begin by explaining my pairings first, and then I'm going to be showing the children side by side with their substitute counterparts and try to make a judgment call on which one of them is better. Now, before we get started, I do have to warn you that the names in this video might be a little weird. I'm using the newest translation patch for Fire Emblem 4, but the names of some of these characters have actually been localized multiple times. For this reason, the names you see on screen may not match up with what you've seen in things like Choose Your Legends. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's go over the mothers of Generation 1 in their joining order, and I'll explain who I'm shipping them with. The first mother you get access to shows up in Chapter 1, and that is Aideen the Priest. She gives birth to Lana, another priest, and Lester, a bow knight. Lana is a staff user, and as such, she's always going to be somewhat useful. But Lester is a physical combat unit, so we can definitely screw him over. We want to tank his strength growth and deprive him of the ever-important pursuit skill. To do this, I'm pairing Aideen up with Holland. Holland is a pretty popular dad for any kids wielding swords since he passes down his minor Odo blood. And you may think that this will boost Lana and Lester further since they already have minor Ullr blood. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, Odo blood only boosts HP and skill, which isn't very useful for them. Furthermore, Holland's Luna skill does not get passed down to Lester since he is not a sword unit. Now, those of you who are perceptive may notice that Holland has the pursuit skill, but he gets it from his class, and class skills are not passed down, only personal skills, which makes him the perfect father to mess up these kids. Up next, we have everyone's favorite sword fighter waifu, Ira, and she gives birth to two Myrmidons, Larsae and Ulster. It's very hard to hamper these kids because they inherit so much of what makes them good from their mother. They will both come with the Nihil, Astra, and pursuit skills no matter who their dad is, so their combat will always be viable, but we can at least ensure we limit their strength as much as possible. For this reason, I'm pairing Ira up with Azel. Azel is normally a decent father to any kind of magic children since he passes down minor Fala blood, which boosts magic, along with the one skill mages often need, which is pursuit. However, Larsae and Ulster already have that skill, so it's completely wasted on them. All Azel really gives them is a somewhat decent magic growth, but their base will still be bad, so if you think this somehow makes them able to wield flame swords, I think you'll be disappointed. As a result, this pairing pretty much negates everything that's good about Azel, and the only thing he ends up passing down is a horrendous strength stat. At the end of the day, both kids will still have Astra, which will let them clear the arena somewhat reliably. But at least with this pairing, we can ensure that they hit like wet noodles. Moving into Chapter 2, the first mother we meet is Lachesis the Princess, and she gives birth to Delman the Sword Knight and Nana the Troubadour. Due to her staves, Nana is going to be useful no matter what, so our main mission here is to screw over her brother as much as possible. Delman will always have a boatload of strength thanks to his Hazul Holy Blood, but there is a way to make sure he won't get much out of it, and that is by pairing his mother up with Arden. Arden mainly passes down a boatload of strength and defense, which both children already have in spades anyway. However, more importantly, it deprives them of pursuits, and gives both of them horrendous skill and speed. Vantage is also not very useful on its own, so this pairing is sure to produce some awful kids. Then we have Erin, the Pegasus Knight, and she gives birth to Fee, also a Pegasus Knight, and Ced the Sage. These two children already get most of what they need from their mother, so they are kinda hard to sabotage. Both of them have Pursuit, and Ced even comes with Adept, so this one is going to be a challenge. The goal here isn't necessarily to make them weak, but just to try and make them less strong. And for this, I choose Beowulf as their father. Beowulf is kind of a weird unit. He has nothing noteworthy in terms of stats or holy blood, but what he does have is Pursuit, which is detrimental for most pairings. And additionally, he also passes down a Cost, which is a skill that has a chance to activate multiple rounds of combat. Pursuit is wasted on both of these kids since they already get it from their mother, and a Cost can actually be downright detrimental for them. However, while this pairing isn't necessarily bad for Fee, what it does do is absolutely murder Ced's magic growth, ensuring it will never increase beyond its starting point. Of course, this is Ced we're talking about here. He will still have good base stats as a pre-promoted sage, but remember, my goal is just to make him worse than his substitute, which I think this pairing will accomplish. Up next is everyone's favorite dancing thought, Sylvia, who gives birth to Ling, who is also a dancer, and Corporal, the priests. Both of these kids are utility characters, and there's no way to make a dancer or a healer bad. But remember, the goal is just to make them worse than their substitutes. Funnily enough, according to many online guides, this is actually already the case. I'm going to explain this more in detail later on in the video when I compare the children to their substitutes, but to touch upon it briefly, the two characters that replace them have access to some very nice utility skills that many prefer over the originals. However, despite this, I'm still going out of my way to give the kids the worst father possible, and that, in my opinion, is Jamka. Jamka is normally a decent father to children who are already strong, since he passes down both Adept and Accost. But for a priest and a dancer, these skills are not very useful at all. Furthermore, Jamka passes down pretty mediocre stats and no Holy Blood, which will greatly hamper Corporal's magic and make both children very squishy. As we enter Chapter 3, we encounter two of the last mothers, the first being Bridget the Sniper. She gives birth to Patty the Thief and Faval the Archer. Being a thief, Patty will always have incredible utility since she can give gold to others, but we can at least attempt to hamper her combat as much as we can, making it hard for her to steal gold or gain levels in the arena. Faval is a character that is much easier to sabotage. We can deprive him of his prized regalia Ufel by simply opting not to initiate the conversation between Aideen and Bridget in Chapter 3. Thanks to his class, Faval will always get pursuit no matter what, but we can ensure that his strength is as low as possible. The perfect dad for this job is Claude. He's only really useful for one thing, and that's passing down the Valkyrie staff, which lets you resurrect a dead unit. Everything else about him really doesn't matter. His major Broggy Blood has very mediocre stat boosts, only affecting HP, magic, luck and resistance by a tiny bit, and the improved staff rank won't do anything if the kids can't wield staves at base. He also passes down 0 skills, meaning his children will suck at combat, which is exactly what we want. And a funny side note, this is probably one of the weirdest pairings in the game, since the major Broggy Blood actually goes to Patty instead of Faval, despite Faval being the older brother. This is probably because Faval already inherits Major Ulir Holy Blood from his mother, and the devs didn't want to have a child character in the second generation with 2 major Holy Bloods. Instead, the major Broggy Blood goes to Patty, and she even comes with the Valkyrie staff in her inventory, despite not being able to use it, which is, strange? Claude x Bridget is also one of the hardest pairings to do in FE4, seeing as they both join very late into Chapter 3, and Generation 1 is only 5 chapters long, meaning you only have about 2.5 chapters to build the 500 love points required for them to fall in love. The last of the Generation 1 mothers is Tiltiu the Thunder Mage, and she gives birth to 2 mages, Arthur and Tinny. These kids are very unique because they have the potential to be both the worst and the best units on your roster depending on their father. Both kids will always inherit the absolutely broken Rat skill from their mother, which gives them a guaranteed critical as long as they're below 50% health. This is very strong because it can be heavily exploited in the arena. You see, in FE4, whenever you lose an arena battle, you don't die, but instead your unit just gets thrown out with 1 HP remaining. That means Arthur and Tinny can re-enter the arena, activate Wrath, and one-shot their opponent. Of course, this isn't 100% reliable, they still need to land their hits, and since criticals do double damage in FE4 instead of triple, Arthur and Tinny may not have enough magic to guarantee a one-shot. For this reason, my main goal with this pairing is to sabotage their magic growth as much as possible, and for this, the last viable father I have left is Noish. He's normally a decent dad for any kind of physical children since he passes down the coveted critical skill, but for these two, it doesn't really add much to their kit since Wrath already guarantees them a crit anyway. This pairing also deprives both of them of the pursuit skill, meaning they'll never really be able to fight much at all. So yeah, those are my Gen 1 pairings intended to make the absolute worst kids possible. However, the question is, have I succeeded in making them worse than the substitutes? That's what I'm going to be finding out in this next part of the video. Alright, we have spent quite a lot of time explaining the pairings, and now it's time to actually witness the results, starting with the kids in Chapter 6. Let us begin with a fan favorite, the Myrmidon Larsae. Her substitute is named Radney, also named Cradney in later localizations. We are going to take a look at these two units side by side, starting with their bases. Unsurprisingly, Radney's are much higher. We did go out of our way to sabotage Larsae as much as possible by nerfing her parents and making sure they got no experience. However, the stats you see here are not even the whole story. All of the substitute units have unique secret events in Generation 2 that only they can activate. Radney's secret event is available in her joining chapter. After waiting for 10 turns next to Johan or Johavier, a unique conversation will play out that will give her 2 strength and 3 luck. With these boosts, Radney looks even stronger than Larce, with 4 extra points of strength and speed, which is pretty significant. Now let's move on to the skills. Larce has Pursuit, Nihil, and Astra, whereas Radney only has Pursuit. Nihil is a bit of a meme skill. It sounds strong on paper, but keep in mind that enemies need a skill to land crits on you in this game, so it ends up being redundant most of the time. Astra, on the other hand, cannot be understated in how powerful it is. It gives Larce a skill percentage chance of triggering 5 extra attacks at full damage, 10 extra attacks if she happens to wield a Brave Sword. Because of how the arena works in this game, this practically guarantees that Larce will clear the gauntlet in every single chapter, which will give her a ton of free gold and experience. Radney can get decently far in most of the gauntlets, but there are some gladiators that she will struggle to get past, and this means that Larce will always have a big advantage over her. This advantage is further exacerbated when we compare their growth rates. While Radney has slightly better strength and res and ties Larce in defense, she loses out in every other stat by quite a bit. But how much does this actually influence their stats at max level? Well, I went through the trouble of calculating them, and here is how their stats will look on average once they both hit level 30. This includes their promotion gains as well as Radney's secret event. One thing that differentiates them is that Larce promotes to Swordmaster, whereas Radney promotes to Hero. This gives Larce far better skill and speed caps, and also gives her the Adept skill. Radney does cap her strength and has much better defenses compared to Larce, but Larce will win out handedly in terms of HP, speed, and skill. On a funny side note, you can see just how little magic she gets from having Azel as a father, showing that this pairing isn't even that good for meme flame sword builds. Anyway, now that we've analyzed these two characters side by side, it's time to make a judgment call on who the better unit is. While Radney certainly has a much stronger start, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to give this one to Larce. Astra is just too good of a skill in the arena, and Larce's potential is just so much better than Radney's. This unit is sadly not worse than its substitute, and thus this one is a failure. Let's move on to the next one. Next up is another Myrmidon in Ulster, also known as Skaha, and his substitute is Rodelban, also known as Dalvin. The story between Ulster and Rodelban is very similar to that of their sisters. Rodelban has far better bases in most areas, and his secret event gives him a further boost. In Chapter 7, after Melgan Castle is conquered, and if Rodelban and Tristan are both under level 10, having them wait next to each other initiates a conversation in which they are scared of getting benched, and thus initiates a training sequence with each other. This grants Rodelban +2 strength as well as +1 skill and defense. This is a nice further boost to his bases, which gives him another early game lead. In terms of skills, Ulster, like his sister Larce, will have Pursuit, Nihil, and Astra, and we have already gone over why Astra is so broken. Rodelban, in addition to his Pursuit skill, does have a unique personal skill in Vantage, which lets him strike first whenever he's below 50% health. On its own, without complementary skills like Wrath, this may not seem like much, but it opens up a really broken combo in the arena. By giving Rodelban the Sleep Sword, you can have him enter the arena at 1 HP, which activates Vantage, and gives him a chance to sleep his enemy before they can do anything back. This has around a 30% chance to activate depending on their res, and is an instant win if it succeeds. You get the Sleep Sword at the start of Chapter 7 from Daisy, so you can do this as soon as the arena is unlocked. This gives Rodelban a guaranteed chance to clear the gauntlet as long as you don't mind re-entering a bunch of times until the Sleep Sword activates. This takes more time than Astra and is a lot more expensive as it costs 15,000 gold to fully repair the Sleep Sword, but it is an option if you want him to clear the arena for some easy golden experience. When it comes to growth rates, once again it's pretty much the same story as with Larce and Radney. Rodelban has slightly better strength, but loses out in all other aspects. Unlike their sisters, however, these two both promote to Hero, so their endgame stats are actually a lot more comparable. Ulster has better speed, while Rodelban has better strength. So with all this in mind, which of these two are the better unit? I am actually going to say Rodelban. The reason is that he has a much better start, his endgame stats are pretty comparable to Ulster, and unlike his sister Radney, he has a way to clear the arena with the Vantage Sleep Sword combo. So as a result, this one is a success. We managed to make this Ulster worse than his substitute. Up next, we have Lana, and her substitute is Mana, also known as Marine in the later localizations. These two characters are both healers, so they're going to be very similar. Their stats are not very far apart, with Mana having slight bonuses to magic speed and resistance. Her luck is lower, but as with the other substitutes, Mana has a secret event. This comes in the form of a talk with Seliph in Chapter 8 if no units have died yet, and if Seliph has no lover yet. This talk gives them 200 love points and also boosts Mana's luck by 5 points, putting her on equal footing with Lana's base luck of 10. In terms of skills, both characters have none, so they're on equal footing here as well. However, when we get to the growth rates, we can see that Lana outclasses her substitute by a lot. Just look at that HP difference. That being said, Mana does hold up in Magic, which is the primary stat for both of them in the early game. In terms of their endgame stats, Mana actually ends up with slightly more magic on average, but loses out in practically every other field. This doesn't matter a whole ton, but it does mean that Lana's fighting skills as a promoted High Priest will be a little better, allowing her to gain more experience and gold in the arena, which in turn helps her buy and repair more expensive staves. For this reason, I have to say that Lana is the better unit of the two, even if it isn't by much. She is not worse than her substitute, so this is another failure. Continuing on with Lana's brother, we have Lester, and his substitute is Dimna, also known as Demna in the later localizations. Since these characters are both physical combat units, they are very stat and skill dependent. Taking a look at their stats side by side, they're not very different, but Dimna has one of the best secret events in the entire game. In the chapter he joins in, if he visits Isaac Castle, he will meet a childhood friend who gives him a necklace, which causes his strength to rise by 5 points. This is very significant, as it will greatly increase his damage output in the early game. But even more substantial, if you compare their skills, Dimna has Pursuit, Lester does not. This is absolutely massive. Lester does have one small advantage in that he has a slightly better bow rank at base thanks to his minor Allure Blood, but this just lets him use the Brave Bow post-promotion, and since we didn't pass that down from his dad, it doesn't drop until halfway through Chapter 8, at which point Dimna has probably promoted anyway. If we take a look at their growth rates side by side, Dimna looks worse on paper with a lower strength and speed growth, but this doesn't really matter as enemy speed in FE4 is generally pretty low, meaning Dimna will usually not have problems doubling generics. In terms of their endgame stats, due to the awful caps of their class, they both turn out pretty similar to each other, both capping strength and skill. Dimna does have less speed, but again, it doesn't really matter because he can double, Lester cannot. At the end of the day, this one is pretty damn easy to decide. Dimna is clearly the better unit here, meaning we have successfully made Lester worse than his substitute. Up next, we have Delmund, also known as Diamut in later localizations, and his substitute is Tristan. Both of these are Sword Knights, which is a surprisingly versatile class in FE4 with Canto Plus and the multitude of enemy axe users, so they're going to be very important. Comparing their stats, unsurprisingly, Tristan is ahead in almost all areas except for luck, with the secret event sparring session with Rotoban boosting this further with 2 extra strength and 1 extra speed and defense, making Tristan look a hell of a lot more impressive than the character he's supposed to be substituting. Taking a look at their skills, this is where they really start to stand apart. Both of them lack Pursuit, so they're not going to be stellar combat units, at least not right away. Delmund has Charisma and Vantage, while Tristan has the critical skill. Charisma is easily the best support skill in the game, increasing the usefulness of all allied units by simply having Delmund be near them. And Vantage, as we touched upon before, allows for the broken sleeve sword combo in the arena. Tristan's critical skill, on the other hand, starts out not being very impressive in the early game, but it becomes very strong later on once he promotes. In terms of their growth rates, it is actually remarkable how well Tristan keeps up with Delmund despite being a substitute, matching him in HP and actually beating him in skill, though he struggles to compete with Delmund's monstrous strength and defense growths, boosted by both Holy Blood and Arden's insane genes. However, if we compare their level 30 stats, we can see that this doesn't end up mattering much due to the low caps of their class. They're actually very similar to one another as units, with Delmund winning out in luck and defense while Tristan beats him in HP, skill, and speed. Still, regardless of how decent Tristan is for a substitute, I'm gonna have to give this win to Delmund simply due to how useful Charisma is. If Tristan had Pursuit, this would have been a lot more of a difficult discussion, but since he doesn't, it's pretty clear cut. This Delmund is not worse than his substitute, making this another failure. Up next, we have Fee the Pegasus Knight, and her substitute is Femina, also known as Hermina in later localizations. This is going to be a very simple comparison because these units are extremely similar to one another. Comparing their bases, they almost look identical. Femina does of course have her substitute secret event, which she sadly shares with another unit in this game. By visiting a village in Chapter 9, she meets a fake Shanan and gets a Draco Shield, improving her defense by 3 points. Even with this boost though, these units still don't look very far apart. In terms of skills is probably where they're the most different. Fee has Pursuit and Accost, while Femina has Adept. In terms of growths, they also look very similar, with Fee having more HP, strength, skill, and defense, while Femina wins out in speed and luck. When comparing their average stats, however, they show that they are almost the same unit, with Fee having slightly better HP, skill, and defense, while Femina has better luck. Deciding which of these units is better is very easy. Fee wins out because she has a guaranteed chance to double with Pursuit, while Femina only has a chance to do it with Adept. So yeah, this Fee is sadly not worse than her substitute, making this another failure. Up next, we have Arthur the Mage and his substitute, Amid the Wind Mage. Not only are these units in separate classes, but they also have different promotions. Arthur promotes the Mage Knight, getting a mount, whereas Amid promotes the Mage Fighter, which has much better caps. On a funny side note, Amid is one of 2 substitutes in this game that actually comes with minor Holy Blood, so both units are actually equally matched in this field. Looking at their initial bases, these units might be the most different ones we've looked at thus far in this video. Amid has more than twice the speed of Arthur, at 14 versus 6. That is pretty significant. He also has a secret event that is triggered in Chapter 8 if he waits on this tile, giving him 3 extra resistance, though this isn't terribly impactful and is also one of the more tedious secret events to unlock since it's so far off the beaten path. In terms of skills, Arthur has Wrath, along with Accost and Critical. Wrath is useful as we've touched upon previously, allowing him to cheese the arena, but considering we've sabotaged Arthur's magic so much, he's going to struggle one-shotting some of the stronger gladiators later on. Amid only has Adept, but considering how fast he is, this will trigger a lot more often than you think. Keep in mind, Genealogy Adept actually has a 20% plus attack speed chance to activate, so it's a little bit better than in the later games. While Arthur has overall better growth rates than Amid, he lacks them in the areas that matter, particularly magic, where Amid beats him handedly, and even tying his speed. Amid's HP is even very solid for a substitute at 90%, so he won't be that much more squishy compared to Arthur. When we look at their endgame stats, you can see how different they truly are, mostly due to different class caps. While Arthur will get a mount, Amid has 26 magic on average compared to Arthur's 14, which will matter quite a lot. It's actually somewhat tricky to debate who the stronger unit is among these two, but I'm going to tentatively hand this win over to Amid. While I think there's some nuance to this discussion, I will say that this Arthur is worse than his substitute, making this one a success. Now we're going to move into Chapter 7, starting with Patty the Thief. Her substitute is Daisy, and out of all the substitute characters in FE4, I think Daisy might just be the worst. 3 base strength with a 10% growth. That's going to be hard to beat. Comparing their stats, it is remarkable how much we've managed to sabotage Patty, though she still beats Daisy slightly in strength and skill, while Daisy has more speed. As with the other substitutes, Daisy of course has her secret event, which takes place in her joining chapter. After you defeat Bloom, if you put Daisy next to Shannon and have her wait, he will instruct her in swordplay, giving her 3 skill and speed. This is nowhere near enough to make her viable, but it does help ever so slightly. With Claude as her father, Patty has no skills to speak of, and Daisy only comes with Miracle, which is actually very good in FE4. It gives you a 10% bonus to your avoid for every HP below 11, so you can get up to 90% avoid if Daisy gets knocked down to 1 health, which can make her unhittable in the arena and is a guaranteed win against whoever she's facing. More often than not though, Daisy is so squishy that it's really hard to get her into Miracle range, and she just ends up dying anyway. And no, before you can say anything, you are not allowed to re-enter the arena at 1 HP to activate Miracle. It doesn't work that way. Taking a look at growth rates, Patty does blow her substitute out of the water thanks to her major Broggy Blood and minor Allure Blood, which gives her a lot of boosts, though not very significant ones in the areas that matter. The only thing Daisy beats her out in is speed, which actually matters post-promotion as Thief Fighters gets Pursuit as a class skill. If we compare their endgame stats, it's kinda sad to see just how bad Daisy is. Just look at that strength stat. She's a lot faster, but that's pretty much about it. So, which one of these two units are better? It's kinda hard to say. Patty has much better potential due to higher growth rates, but she starts out even weaker than Daisy at base, and with no skills to help her out in the arena. I think even giving her a single level there is going to be a huge challenge. So for that reason, I'm actually going to give this one to Daisy, because if you can be bothered, you can abuse Miracle to at least give her a few levels in the arena, and that will give her some gold to hand out, making this a tiny success. Up next, we have Nana the Troubadour. Her substitute is Jan. Both of these characters will mainly be healing, so they are not going to differ that much from each other in terms of gameplay. If we take a look at their base stats, Jan is slightly ahead in most areas, as we've come to expect, allowing her to be a little more durable early on. She also has a secret event in Chapter 9, which she shares with Femina, boosting her defense by 3 points if she visits this village, though I really think Femina needs this more than her. Jan has 0 skills, however, while Nana has the insanely useful Charisma skill, not to mention Vantage, which she can abuse in the arena if you want to give her the Sleep Sword. In terms of growths, it's kind of funny to see just how bad Nana's magic and skill growths are with Arden as a parent, though she does have monstrous HP, strength, and defense to make up for it. Their endgame stats are quite different, with Nana capping her strength as a paladin, which will help her out a little bit in combat. 6 magic on average though is pretty damn horrendous. At least Jan can do something with her average magic of 14. That being said, not all staves depend on magic to work. The Recover Staff, for example, will always be useful for Nana, so this isn't that big of a deal. At the end of the day, comparing these units is not difficult. One has Charisma, the other does not. This will make Nana a viable support unit regardless of how much we try to sabotage her stats. So this Nana is not worse than her substitute, making this a failure. Up next is Lean the Dancer and her substitute Layla. I'm going to save you a lot of time on this one. There is only one thing that differentiates these two characters. Actually, there's 2, and no, I'm not talking about cup sizes here, but rather their skills and Layla's secret event. Still, I'll show them side by side, if for no other reason than to satisfy your curiosity. Lean has better luck while Layla has better speed, but it really doesn't matter. Layla has a secret event in her joining chapter. If she visits this village, she gets a barrier sword, which boosts rest by 7 when held. This sword isn't exclusive to her, you can sell it to someone else, though I find that she uses it well. It lets her survive the old bolting thrown her way, which can be nice. In terms of skills, Lean has many, Adept, Miracle, and Accosts, but none of these really matter. Layla, on the other hand, has Charisma, which is probably the best skill a dancer can have. She's already going to be in the center of your army refreshing 4 units at once, so boosting them further with 10% hit and accuracy is just incredibly useful. This skill alone is the reason people prefer Layla over Lean, and why none of this really matter. At the end of the day, dancers don't really need to go into the arena. You can send them in there, but it's kind of pointless. If you want to cap them out, all you have to do is just dance 270 times as soon as you get them, and boom, they're done. Comparing their growth rates, Lean has better HP, magic, luck, and resistance, while Layla has better strength, skill, and speed. When capped out, their stats look like this. They're both honestly pretty interchangeable to one another. At the end of the day, this isn't really a discussion. Layla wins because of her charisma. Imagine that, a support unit with the support skill is better than the support unit without it. This Lean is worse than her substitute, making this another victory. Up next, we have Tinny the Mage, and her substitute is Linda the Thunder Mage. Remember when I said there were 2 substitutes with minor Holy Blood? Linda is the second one. These girls start out in different classes, but they both promote to mage fighters, so they end up being very similar to one another, at least on the surface. In terms of base stats, Linda beats out Tinny by 4 points of magic and skill, which is pretty significant. Her resistance is also boosted by a further 3 points from her secret event in Chapter 8, which isn't huge, but it does help her fight other mages in the arena. In terms of skills, both girls come with the incredibly broken Rat skill, which allows them to cheese the arena if their magic is high enough. Tinny also comes with critical and a cost from her father, but that pales in comparison to Linda, who has Paragon as a personal skill. This doubles all experience gains, which makes leveling her a breeze. The fact that Linda's a Thunder Mage in conjunction with her minor Turtle Blood also gives her A rank in Thunder at base. and since the Thoron Tome drops very early on in Chapter 7 from Ishtar, Linda can get her hands on it as soon as she joins, which gives her an amazing 20 Might Tome, which she can use to land devastating Wrath criticals in the arena. In terms of growth rates, Linda has more than double the magic growth of Tinny. And while Tinny beats her in most other areas, it is magic that mostly matters for these girls, since their road to fame is going to be one-shotting units with Wrath criticals. And if we compare their endgame stats, you can see that Linda is so much better at this compared to Tinny, with her average magic of 25 compared to Tinny's 17. So this one is pretty clear cut. Linda is easily the better of these two units, having a better early, mid, and late game thanks to Paragon and superior magic. So yeah, we successfully made this Tinny worse than her substitute, making this another success. Up next we have Faval, also known as Fabale in the later localizations, and his substitute is Azaello. Both of these come rather late in Gen 2 as foot archers, so they're not in the greatest position to be useful, but let's see how they measure up against one another. Looking at their base stats, Faval really does come with a boatload of luck thanks to being Claude's son, but Azaello still has better offensive stats, and he even has a secret event in his joining chapter by visiting this village, where he meets a girl who gives him some berries, giving him +3 base strength. This puts his strength up to 15, which is quite impressive. In terms of skills, both of them have Pursuit, but Azaello also has a Cost, which is a very good skill for an archer to have, since it can give him extra attacks with no added risk. Now if we compare their growth rates, Azaello looks quite bad with his 10% skill and 20% speed growth, but since his bases are so good, and because promo bonuses are so high in FE4, he still turns out pretty decent. If we compare their endgame stats, you can see that they're not far apart at all. Sure, Faval caps his luck, which doesn't really matter much in FE4, and he does have decent resistance, but look at the strength difference. Azaello blows him out of the water. He will hit like an absolute truck, and the extra speed that Faval gets isn't really that impactful. Faval may be better against mages and certain bosses, but Azaello will be better against everything else. So for this reason, I think we can conclude that Azaello is the better unit. So yeah, we have successfully made this Faval worse than his substitute, making this another success. Then we have Ced the Sage, and his substitute is Hawk. No, not that Hawk, this Hawk. These units are both incredibly powerful and are meant to help carry you through the endgame. In fact, some call them the Gotos of FE4. Let us see how they both compare to each other. And wow, it's insane to see just how much Beowulf ruins magic in his child, as Ced has 8 less points of magic compared to Hawk. And it's about to get even worse, because Hawk has a very powerful substitute-only secret event. By entering Luthetia Castle in Chapter 9, he will receive a boost of +3 magic and resistance, putting his magic up at 25 and his resistance at 20, which is pretty damn good. In terms of skills, both of them have Pursuit and Adept, but Ced does get a cost from his father, which can occasionally be nice, but it's probably overkill if it procs. In terms of growth rates, Ced does look much better than Hawk in most areas except for magic, where he has a 5% growth, meaning his magic will stay at 15 for the rest of the game. And if we look at their endgame stats, that's exactly what is likely to happen. Ced has 15 magic to Hawk's 28. And while Ced does beat him in terms of HP and skill, it is clear who the better combat unit is. That being said, Ced will probably still be good anyway, due to how strong the Lightning Tome is in FE4. However, the goal was just to make Ced worse than his substitute, and in that, I think we have succeeded. This Ced is worse than Hawk, making this a success. The last child unit you get in Generation 2 joins in Chapter 9, and he is Corporal the Priests, and his substitute is Charlo, also known as Charlotte in the later localizations. Both of these units join in a very tricky spot as immensely underleveled priests late into Gen 2, so they are not usually seen as very impactful units, but let's compare them anyway. Their stats don't really matter much since they can't fight pre-promoted. However, their skills is what sets them apart. Corporal has Adept, Miracle, and a Cost, all of which aren't really going to serve him well until he promotes. Charlo, on the other hand, has a single skill, but that is Paragon, which is insanely useful for a late joining unit like this. When he uses staves, he's almost guaranteed to get a full level every time, so getting him to promotion is incredibly easy. In terms of growth rates, Shiloh also has a big edge over Corporal with his 50% magic growth compared to Corporal's 20%. The rest of the growths don't really matter much, but we can take a look at their endgame stats just to satisfy our curiosity. You can see that Shiloh almost caps his magic at 26. Make no mistake, Corporal will be a much better fighting unit after promotion, but honestly, if you need a High Priest to fight in Gen 2's late game, you probably have much bigger problems going on. Also, Shiloh has one of the most unique secret events in the game. He doesn't get any stat boosts, but by waiting next to Hannibal after Grutia Castle is conquered, he gets a Berserk Staff, the only one obtainable in the game. While it only has one use and costs a fortune to repair at 30,000 gold, it allows Shiloh to berserk any unit from 10 range as long as his magic exceeds their res. There's so much cool stuff you can do with this staff. I personally like to sell it and give it to Hawk, as he uses it much better. One of the more popular tactics you can do with this staff is berserking Deadlord Gallus in the final map to have him hostile on Julius, which lowers him down to 1 HP. Not necessarily useful, but very funny. So yeah, comparing these two units, which one is better? I think it's pretty safe to say it's Shiloh. Better magic, Paragon, and a unique staff just gives him so much more utility over this Corporal, who is worse than his substitute, making this another success. So yeah, here are all the children I was able to make worse than their substitute, and here are those I did not. So in total, I was able to make 9 out of the 14 children in Generation 2 worse, which goes to show just how broken they are, since there's still 5 of them who will always be stronger even if you go out of your way to sabotage them. Though that being said, maybe there's a different combination of parents that will yield better results in this regard. If you're a FE4 pairing connoisseur, why don't you leave your potential pairings in the comment section and see if you can do better than me, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Remember to leave a like and comment, as this video took far longer to make than I cared to admit, but at least now you have a comprehensive guide on how to make the absolute worst FE4 children possible. Is this useful in any way? No, it isn't, but I hope you enjoyed it nevertheless. Now please leave.